Silence over the Arctic. That's how this begins. For years, the story was simple. Everyone accepted it. Nobody questioned it out loud. Stealth wins. There is one fighter jet, and every serious Air Force eventually falls in line behind it. That was the assumption baked into every defense briefing, every quiet conversation between Allied Air Forces. Buy the F-35, join the club, don't ask questions. Then Canada asked a question, not loudly, not with headlines. Just a quiet decision, almost administrative in appearance, to let a second aircraft into the room. The Saab Gripen E. And in doing so, Canada didn't just run a fighter competition. Canada exposed a fault line running through the entire architecture of modern air power. A fault line that had been there all along, waiting for someone patient enough and confident enough to press on it. This is the story of how a middle power forced the world's most dominant defense narrative to defend itself. For decades, Canada flew the CF-18 Hornet, a workhorse, reliable, battle-tested, but aging, reaching finally the end of its operational runway after a service life measured in decades. Canada needed a replacement, one built to defend one of the largest airspaces on the planet, to survive brutal Arctic conditions where runways are scarce, and to operate seamlessly inside NATO's shared command structure for the next 40 years. This wasn't a shopping decision. This was sovereign resolve decided once for a generation of pilots not yet born. And the expectation, the mainstream expectation, whispered in defense circles around the world, was that Canada would simply fall in line. The F-35 was already the presumed heir to Canadian skies. Fifth-generation stealth, sensor fusion that could stitch together a battlefield picture in real time. Real-time networking that let pilots see what Allied aircraft saw, hundreds of miles away. Several NATO members had already signed on, one after another, each signature reinforcing the next. The aircraft looked less like a choice and more like an inevitability. Then Saab arrived, and the calculation changed. The Gripen E wasn't pitched as the most advanced stealth platform ever built. That was never the pitch. Instead, the company offered something quieter and in its own way far more disruptive. Practicality. Fewer maintenance hours between flights, shorter runways, lower cost across the aircraft's entire lifetime. Not just at the moment of purchase, an aircraft built not to dominate a parade, but to survive a war of attrition, flying from highways, from dispersed and remote bases, scattered across difficult terrain, hard for an enemy to hunt down, and harder still to destroy on the ground. This was Sweden's own defense philosophy, forged over decades of preparing to fight outnumbered and dispersed, now offered to Canada as a template. For a country like Canada, vast, northern, thinly connected by roads and runways that thin to almost nothing above a certain latitude, that wasn't a footnote. That was the entire argument. Here is the first layer of Canada's calculated strategy. Question the premise, not reject the F-35 outright. That was never on the table. But refuse to accept most advanced as a silent synonym for correct choice. That single act, simply entertaining the Gripen seriously, giving it a real evaluation instead of a courtesy glance, cracked open a debate that had gone unspoken for years across NATO. Was every nation's mission identical? Did every Air Force truly need every capability the F-35 offered at the price the F-35 demanded, given its own geography and budget? The second layer reframed the entire cost conversation. The F-35 carries extraordinary technological weight, an extraordinary financial weight to match, one that follows an aircraft for its entire service life. Procurement costs, long-term sustainment expenses, ongoing software updates that never really stop. All of it became a subject of open political debate, not just inside Canada, but everywhere the aircraft was sold. Saab moved into that opening with a different offer entirely. Industrial partnerships, technology cooperation, real manufacturing opportunities for Canadian companies to build, assemble, and sustain the very aircraft their country would fly. Not just an aircraft, an economic architecture, one that could seed thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in investment on Canadian soil. That is strategic patience. That is a middle power leveraging a global contract to build something that outlasts the jet itself. The third layer is the sharpest one: doctrine versus dogma. The F-35's advantage is stealth, the ability to slip into heavily defended airspace unseen. Its fused sensors painting a single, coherent tactical picture for the pilot in real time. Nobody disputes that advantage. But the Gripen offered a different theory of survival altogether. Electronic warfare designed to confuse enemy targeting systems, rapid data links connecting pilot to pilot, raw agility, and a tempo of operations built for flying more sorties, faster, from more places. Not invisibility, disruption. Two philosophies standing side by side. Two different answers to the exact same question. How does a nation stay alive in a contested sky? And here's the contrast we're sitting with, the one that defines this entire chapter. America's defense export machine has operated for years on presumption. The quiet expectation that allied nations simply align, simply commit, simply follow the technological momentum of the most powerful platform on the market. Because that is what everyone else has already done. That's not a strategy, that's gravity. It works because it has always worked, until someone declines to fall. Canada's move was the opposite of gravity. It was resistance, deliberate and calm, entirely without theatrics. A refusal to be pulled in without first asking what actually serves Canadian territory, Canadian industry, and Canadian doctrine. That is the masterstroke. Not choosing the Gripen outright, not rejecting the F-35 outright either. The masterstroke was making the choice contestable at all, treating a presumed inevitability as an open question, and in doing so, forcing a reckoning that reached far beyond its own borders. Because the ripple effects didn't stay in Canada. They spread. Military analysts worldwide started rerunning the comparison for their own air forces, their own budgets, their own geography. Nations eyeing their own fighter purchases began weighing affordability, logistics, and industrial return alongside raw combat performance. The exact framework Canada's competition had placed on the table for everyone to see. Some analysts pointed to the rising weight of drones, long-range precision missiles, and space-based surveillance, arguing that stealth alone might no longer be the single deciding factor it once was. Others held firm. Stealth remains essential against the most sophisticated modern air defenses, and fifth-generation aircraft will continue to shape the next era of conflict regardless of what smaller, cheaper platforms can offer. Both sides have a case. That is, in the end, the entire point. Canada's competition didn't hand the world a final answer. It handed the world a better question, one that will now be asked in every future procurement, whether the F-35 wins again or not. Supporters of the F-35 still make a serious argument, and it deserves to be taken seriously. Interoperability. Shared training pipelines, shared maintenance networks, shared software development across a growing NATO fleet creates real strategic value in coalition warfare. The kind of value that only compounds as more nations climb aboard the same platform. That's not nothing, but even that argument now has to be made, defended, justified, laid out explicitly, instead of simply assumed as self-evident. And that shift, subtle as it is, belongs to Canada. It belongs to the moment Canada decided a second aircraft deserved a real seat at the table. In the end, this was never really about which jet wins the contract. It was about who gets to define the terms of the question in the first place. For years, the terms were set elsewhere, and nations were simply expected to answer them on cue. Canada's quiet transformation was to stop answering on cue and start asking its own questions, on its own terms, at its own pace. Training, readiness, affordability, sovereign strategy tailored to sovereign geography. These aren't consolation prizes handed to nations that can't afford the flashiest technology. They are, Canada demonstrated to a watching world, the real architecture of air power, the foundation everything else is built on. Whether the skies above Canada eventually belong to the F-35 or the Gripen, one truth already stands. The old question, which aircraft is most advanced, has been quietly, patiently replaced by a harder, more honest one. Which aircraft actually serves a nation's own defining test, its own territory, its own strategic reality. That reframing, patient and deliberate, and entirely without spectacle, may be Canada's most lasting victory in this entire chapter of modern military aviation. What do you think about all this? Tell us in the comments below. See you in the next one.